There it
It looks
is.
like it's working, Jody.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, everyone. Good evening. My name is Mike Remington, a City Council member with the City of Duval. This is our City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. It's now 5:32 in the evening. We'll call our meeting to order. Tonight, we have the several items. We have oath of office for Rick Schaefer, who is our newest City Council member. We have the good of the order. And then finally, we have three specific items: a water system plan update from Director Leniszewski and Murray Smith. We have a preliminary high-level year-end 2019-2020 biennial budget overview from Director Dana Mason. And finally, we have a community survey for discussion. That's from our land use committee, and that will be Director Thomas helping us with that. So with that, Mayor, we'll begin with our oath of office. Are you conducting that? I
Yes.
assumed you were.
Yes, I am. So first of all,
Rick Schaefer.
it's a pleasure to have Mr. Schaefer as a member of the Duval City Council and a member of our city team. I had a wonderful chat with him earlier this week to get to know him a little bit better, and couldn't be more excited to have him here as part of the group. So with that, we'll go ahead and do the ceremonial oath of office. He has officially been sworn in by the clerk. These COVID times definitely make things strange. So with that, Mr. Schaefer, will you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Rick Schaefer.
I, Rick Schaefer.
Having been duly appointed to the office of City of Duval.
Having been duly appointed to the office of City of Duval.
Council position number 2.
Council position number 2.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully and impartially.
That I will faithfully and impartially.
Discharge the duties of this office.
Discharge the duties of this office.
As prescribed by law.
As prescribed by law.
And to the best of my ability.
And to the best of my ability.
And that I will support and maintain.
And that I will support and maintain.
The Constitution of the State of Washington and of the United States of America.
The Constitution of the State of Washington and the United States of America.
Excellent. Well, welcome officially, Councilmember Schaefer.
Thank you. And believe me, I've said this before, I know, so I probably sound like a broken record, but I'm very, very pleased to be part of the council. Very pleased to be part of the city and helping determine what happens in the city going forward. So thank you all very much.
Well, congratulations, Rick. You look so dapper tonight in a suit and tie. I remember starting my early meetings with a suit and tie or sport coat, and now I'm in shorts and a khaki Hawaiian shirt or something. So it just goes downhill.
It's your fault, Mike. You set a high bar for style, so I was trying to somewhat get up there myself tonight.
Well, welcome. We are on the call of order, or I'm sorry, good of the order. And I just open that up to any of our council members or staff if you have anything you'd like to share. I see Councilmember Langle.
Yeah, hi. After the retreat, a couple of things came to mind, and these are items I've brought up before. Even the retreat we had the year before. But now that we have our code committees, council committees in place, there's things we agreed to a year ago, which, we've been, I think, pretty good about getting in the rhythm of, but there's other work to do. And the things that we have talked about that I think we've done a pretty good job with is, getting minutes for our code committee meetings and getting our presentations and documents on the SharePoint. And it's under committees and, council committees. So you can go in there and you can look at any of the committees and the information they've posted. So we should be thankful for that, because there hadn't been code council committees for a while. The things that we have left outstanding, and we acknowledged them a year ago, is that there are other procedures we need to put in place for council committees. And these should be seen as distinct from the larger set of procedures we're going to be revisiting. But there are little things like, how do we decide which committee an item is going to go to? And is it an item that might be shared between two committees for some reason? And I have an example. There's things like the council member Iyer often talked about, like making sure that materials are in the SharePoint in advance of meetings, so that council members at COW meetings can be fully informed of topics when they're on the agenda. And there's some other things too. I mean, I think terminology in committees is really important. What's the distinction between when we give a nod for something to go forward to the COW and to full council versus when something is an actual formal recommendation? So the good news is we've accomplished some things. The additional news is we have more work to do. And so I just wanted to remind us of that, because now that we have, I think, all but one operational committee, which is super exciting, we have to get some of these other things in place so that we avoid pitfalls that have been identified by council members in the past, which is building trust between committees, having a process that everyone can rely on that's very consistent, understanding when things have budget implications, and when something is set as a budget item, that job then falls to a different committee, not finance and administration, but getting that refined so we're all in agreement. So I wanted to put that in the good of the order so that it can show up in a parking lot item. And of course, our Mayor Pro Tem will take care of when that happens in consultation with the rest of us. But I didn't want us to forget that we have more work to do on procedures.
Thank you, Dot. You're so precise with those items. We will be working on updating committee procedures and formalizing that in our council procedures handbook, which needs to be updated this year. I think the first committee that we really staffed a year ago with finance administration set a high bar for us, really placing information in the folder for everybody to see, making sure there were no surprises, and making sure that really ahead of meetings where we're discussing things, that all the things the committee saw are available to everyone else. Just as a reminder, the council has not given any of their authority to make decisions at council meetings to any committee. So really the only time we vote and do that is at the council meetings. But I also want to say the same positive things. The very fact that we're talking about it, I think, is outstanding. And I'm looking forward to more of our committee meetings. We're working closer with staff. We get to see more of the internal operations and learn more about the city. And I think this is really good for us as a community. Others, anything for the good of the order? I don't see any hands up. I will mention that we did have a city council workshop last week. We talked about council goals, a work plan for this coming year. We did that also in our budget process, but there are things that aren't part of the budget process that we identified we'd like to look at. I'm finalizing those, and we'll have, with all the council input, and we'll have those out to all our council members and have those posted as well for our citizens. We did talk about change in form of government. This is an educational piece for council. We currently have a strong mayor council form of government. We looked at several other types, how those work in other cities. And again, that's just something that we're talking about, looking at, educating ourselves. And we'll be looking at that, continuing to look at it going into the future. Well, with that, we'll move on to our next item. This is the water system plan update from Steve Liniszewski, who's our Director of Public Works, and Marie Smith.
Mayor Pro Tem, I think Councilmember Hoag had her hand up.
Oh,
I
I'm
was-
sorry. Councilmember
I-
Hall.
So I just wanted to let you know that Chief Hurt had his hand up, and I don't know that you could see it, so.
Chief Hurt. See, I've got so many backups here. I love this job.
It's probably the khaki shorts. Real quick, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I wanted to address council real quick that I have a staff report that I'm going to submit to you through email tomorrow. I apologize, I did not get it to you today or prior to today's meeting, but it's regarding police hiring. And all I would ask is that you review it. And if you have any questions, please, in the next week or so before the next meeting, reach out to myself or either Lieutenant DeBach, Lieutenant Saborn, for any questions you have. I will be bringing it to the meeting on the 16th and hopefully asking for a vote and a decision. So please look for that email. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Chief,
Hey,
thank you.
Chief, excuse me.
Go ahead, Rick.
Chief, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Since I was part of the discussion on that in the Public Safety Committee, what's the urgency on making an offer to this top-rated candidate? Do we need to do that like ASAP? How quickly do we need to act here?
So thank you for the question. The good news is, and I guess I'll give a little bit of preface now that you've asked the question. We do have a entry-level candidate that was the top of our oral boards who, you know, if you look at the 13, I think, that made the list for hiring, he is actually leaps and bounds above the rest of the candidate pool. If you remove number 1, there really is no competition, I guess you could say. We vetted this, the oral boards have vetted this candidate very well for our community and for our police department. We do try to lean our questions and our oral boards toward a best fit for the community, and so we have a really good candidate. And the urgency, we have been in constant contact with this candidate, council member, and he is very, very interested in Duval. He wants to be in Duval. So, you know, it'll make a whole lot more sense when you see the email, or I'm sorry, the email with my staff report. I will be asking on the 16th for permission to pre-hire a candidate for my exit. That's what this entails. And again, I don't want to lose the candidate. I don't think the city wants to lose this candidate. So that's what it is. And just for your knowledge, I guess, the budget impact is nothing. And I will explain that with any questions you have individually. And with the letter that you review when you receive it tomorrow, I hope it all makes sense. But good question. Urgency is certainly there in the next couple of weeks, but right now he is dedicated to Duval.
Okay, that's good news, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our water system plan update with Director Liniszewski and Murray Smith.
Good evening, council and citizens. Steve Liniszewski, Public Works. As I have my mask on and we have duly appointed staff who do a great job, I will be handing this off to Mr. Tozer, and then our assistance is from Murray Smith and Associates, so Marshall and Stephanie are here to do that. So I'm gonna turn off my road noise with my window open, getting us fresh air, and hand it over.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Steve. Just for the record, I am wearing tuxedo pants since we're talking about fashion tonight. But as far as introing what we wanted to do, and we're going to turn it over to Marshall and Stephanie. So they're fantastic. We've had an opportunity. Stephanie's newer to us, but we've worked with Marshall before on another comp plan, our last comp plan, and he's been very familiar with our system. It's nice that he brings a lot of that, wealth of knowledge of building our system in modeling. And so he's very familiar with the ins and outs of everything we're doing. So we're fortunate to have him, and Stephanie's been great. But as far as how we're looking at rolling out, this has obviously been going on for quite a long time. It takes a lot of effort to do these water system plans. But tonight is really meant to be just a pure introduction. So it's really just getting kind of people to a level place and informing those who maybe are not as aware of what our water system, the ins and outs of our water system, what it looks like, you know, what kind of geography do we cover, some basic nuts and bolts of what's required of this, you know, more or less legal document, something that we're required to have as a water system. So we're really just trying to set a baseline introduction. We're not pushing much for decision or anything like that. We come back on, we did an introduction. I did a pre-introduction on Public Committee on the 20th. So they got a little bit more information than you guys might get tonight. But then when we come back to council on the 16th of February, FCS group will introduce the financial chapter. And so that's got a lot of the meat to it. And that's a lot of the very interesting bits, just as they did for the sewer system plan. So that'll cover a lot of other, you know, very interesting territory for council. And then our plan is to come back into March. And so that's when we'll start to be looking for a lot more robust discussion. You guys will have the draft plan submitted to you probably by the end of this week as we just tighten up a few things. So you'll have that document in your hands for quite a bit. And then we'll be looking for where your comfort level is, maybe in the first meeting of March, maybe the second meeting of March. But March is when we'd like to get this plan adopted, and then we can push it forward to Department of Health in King County for their review and approvals, which will take months and months and months. And we also have an obligation to reply to their comments. So that's sort of the overarching plan in a nutshell. But for tonight's festivities, I'll turn it over to Marshall or Stephanie or which of you prefer to speak, and I'll try to remain mum.
Good evening. I'm Marshall Meyer. I'm the project manager for Murray Smith on this project. Thank you for having us tonight. We have prepared a brief PowerPoint kind of presentation and some slides that I'm hoping to share. I will try that, and hopefully the IT stars are aligning. Let me see. Are you all able to see a picture of your Crestview Estates tank? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Great.
Looks good.
Great. Yeah, so this, so we'll start through kind of with a general overview of the project and the background, and go through some of the main elements of the water system plan update process and kind of really the requirements, and then talk through the next steps and schedules. Sean kind of summarized some of those initial steps, but as he alluded to, there are several basically review agency approvals that need to happen. And so we'll present on the, we'll kind of talk through the schedule of that and those steps as well. And then we have a time for questions and answers at the end, but I certainly would be open if anybody has a question as we're going through it. Please feel free to ask those at any time. Well, and actually, before I get into the background maybe of the water system plan requirements and the project, like Sean said, I've been working with the city's water system actually since my previous firm back in 2002. So I've done work for the water system since that time. So a couple of decades now, I guess. And it's been great to work with city staff and see the city of Duval continue to grow. And I would definitely echo what Sean said. There's a lot of data that needs to be collected and synthesized, and Sean and Steve and Larissa have been phenomenal, and I'm sure many others at the city have been very instrumental in getting that information to us. So the last water system plan was approved by the Department of Health in 2013. A comprehensive water system plan is largely prescriptive and dictated through the State Department of Health Drinking Water Division, and much of its requirements are spelled out in detail in the Washington Administrative Code 246-290. Specifically 100 talks about the planning, but 246-290 is heavily involved in the drinking water systems of the state. And unlike some other states, Washington has very prescriptive, strict requirements that you need to cover in a water system plan. And so much of the planning document is actually pretty well spelled out in that water in that WAC. Really, what Department of Health and the state want to know is that water system has capacity and is being managed well and has capacity for future growth, and not only from the operational capabilities, and that's through different certifications that are required, as well as just the physical operational capacity. So the right size tanks, pipes, pump stations, wells in some cases, in your case that you've got enough contractual supply from Seattle Public Utilities, as well as the technical expertise that you have, design standards and inspection requirements and things like that that you're fulfilling, managerial capacity to maintain the system, and then financial capability. And we'll talk more about the financial in a different evening. This kind of all feeds into the more physical and managerial and operational staffing stuff is what we'll talk about tonight. But ultimately, that's what this the plan tries to prove and plan out ahead, and coordinate with other jurisdictions and counties to make sure that that there'll be enough water and it'll be continue to be a safe, reliable supply in the future. The 2013 plan had a 6-year approval period. We have been working with Department of Health to let them know and keep them informed of the progress of this plan, so they know that it is in progress and expecting it soon. Since that time, Department of Health has extended the approval period that's allowed to 10 years. And so in this water system plan, we are requesting a 10-year approval period from the state. So instead of updating it every 6 years, you would be able to update it every 10 years. We looked at analyzing the water system for a 10 and 20-year planning period. That is, again, a prescriptive requirement that at least 20 years, you need to look at a planning horizon of at least 20 years, and that that 10-year, first 10 years in more details. And then we also prepared a capital improvement plan that identifies any sort of improvements that would resolve deficiencies that were identified. So the water system overview, not everyone thinks about water systems as often as we do in the public works and the engineering standpoint. So I wanted to maybe provide just a brief overview of the city of Duvall's water system. On the south end of the water system, the city has 2 connections to Seattle Public Utilities, who provides all of the water to the city. The city also has 2 water storage tanks, 1 pump station, and they have 13 pressure reducing valve stations. So these are buried vaults with control valves that maintain pressure and ensure that pressure is not too high and not too low as it moves throughout the system for customers. And you also have 2 pressure relief stations that are more of a protection feature down near the river that provide protection if there is an overpressurization event, and it protects the pipes from being burst. There's a total of about 43 miles of pipe in the water system, and the system is separated into 5 different pressure zones, and the pressure zones are basically boundaries that allow a comfortable level of water pressure for homes as the elevation changes throughout the city. And probably not surprising to anybody, it generally is lower elevation on the west side and higher elevation on the east side, and so that's kind of how the pressure zones are broken up that way. The city of Duvall has a water service area that, unlike some areas, it has a little bit of kind of free space around it. So with Woodinville Water District to the west and King County Water District 119 to the east there. And in the city's case, the boundaries are not contiguous or adjacent necessarily to the other water purveyors. And we kind of went through overview there of the water system, but there's a bigger view of that and the different major facilities there. And the water system has, like I said, 43 miles of pipe roughly. The large majority of that pipe, about 80% of it, is ductile iron, which is a good pipe material that's kind of the current best practice for its longevity and robustness, especially in any sort of earthquake event, those types of things. PVC pipe is about 17% of the water system, which is also a commonly used even today water pipe material. And then asbestos cement is around 3% of the pipe. That's a more of a vintage water material, that pipe material that is getting phased out and replaced in large order by the city through some of its projects. And that type of pipe can be kind of brittle and subject to break. So getting it out of the system is helpful for preventing water loss and main breaks. And then generally the pipe sizing in the distribution system is between 4 and 12 inches in diameter, the majority of that being 8 inches in diameter. And that's fairly common for most residential areas and largely based on the fire flow requirement. So a good mixture there and generally pretty well adequately sized water mains. So the elements of the plan, I won't go through all of this, but basically to meet the requirements from the Department of Health, we've broken out 10 main chapters of the water system plan that address all of those requirements. And then we've included as appendices several other planning documents that the Department of Health requires too, that are largely already standard documents that the city maintains, like a cross connection control program and things of that nature, that we just keep in there for reference for the Department of Health and to make it one cohesive, kind of complete document. And Stephanie will step through more of the system specific and kind of a planning analysis here.
Yeah, so I'm Stephanie Ard, and I've been helping Marshall with this plan. I was the project engineer, which basically means I was getting the data and then doing a lot of analysis of the data and then having Marshall check and help me understand what I was looking at whenever I had questions. So it's been great working with everyone at the city to get this through. So as Marshall said, a lot of this plan is based on DOH requirements. One of their major requirements is reviewing historical data. So this plan, we looked at water, the water usage between 2012 and 2019. That's because the last plan looked at water usage up to the 2011 point. So DOH knows what was happening before 2012. So we're just taking it from the last plan to the current. So over that time period, overall water usage in the system has increased, but the per capita demand has actually decreased. So that's just showing that as your population is increasing, the amount of water is also increasing, but which is pretty common and what we'd expect. But the demand per person is actually decreasing. And this is a trend we're seeing through the area. And it's mostly due to just better appliances that are more water efficient being entered into homes as old dishwashers and laundry machines die. And they really do make an impact on the amount of water that is required per person in the system. And there's other factors that will factor into that. The type of customer, as smaller lots are developed, smaller lots usually use less water. So there's other factors that will factor into a lower demand per capita, but more efficient appliances makes a big difference. And then the other big trend we wanted to highlight for historical water use is the city is historically has a very low distribution system leakage. Distribution system leakage is a term DOH uses to capture the water that is not easily defined. So you have the water that is supplied through the system, and then you have the water that is consumed, that is known to be consumed through customers or through other known water maintenance acts like flushing. And then you have a small percentage of water that you can't really account for. Low system leakage shows that, one, you're not having a lot of pipe leaks, and then two, your operators are operating it well and they know where the water is going when it's being used. So distribution leakage has been under 7% since 2012. DOH requires it to just be under 10%. So the city's leakage is well under what DOH requires. So we use that historical water usage, and we're projecting it into the future so that we can start to project what the city is going to need in the future. We use both the historical water usage as well as population projections. So for the city of Duval, the population projection is based on the city, what's inside the city limits, as well as what's inside the UGA, and then some additional area outside of the city. And that's just because the water service area is actually larger than what is the city limits. And so we're just trying to make sure we're accounting for where water lines may go in the future, though we don't expect a lot of big developments or water mains going outside city limits. We're mostly focused within that city limits. So the population projections were coming out of the city's comprehensive plan, as well as the recent planning documents and developments that you have. And we're just using the most recent, most current information and using that to project forward to get the best guess of where the city is going to be for water usage in the next 10 and 20 years. So this is a quick spreadsheet or table, and I don't want to get bogged down into the details too much, but it's just generally showing you this is what DOH is requiring us to look at. So as we've talked about, it's prescriptive. We're checking boxes through DOH, making sure your water system meets all the requirements. So DOH is wanting us to look at a few different categories: water supply, the storage or your tanks, pump stations, and then the distribution system. That's mostly where the service pressures come into. DOH, as you can see on the agency standards column, is the main agency that's requiring these. The city has requirements on a few. Those are mostly areas where DOH has a kind of a broad category, and the city narrows it down so that we can use these requirements to analyze your system. So when we looked at your system, overall functioning very well. Your storage, your tanks are meeting DOH requirements. The supply stations far exceed DOH requirements, and the distribution system, it meets and exceeds DOH requirements. For the distribution system, we're looking at both fire flow as well as low pressure scenarios. So those are two worst case scenarios, and we test using the hydraulic model to make sure that it meets all pressure and velocity constraints, and recommended improvements wherever those are required, but there's not many. The one area that needs improvements is the 615 booster pump station, and this was identified in the previous plan as needed improvements in that 20-year period because of planned growth. That 20-year period would today be the 10-year period, so before 2030, but because of DOH requirement updates that happened in 2019, 2020, we're actually recommending improvements sooner. That's largely because DOH has increased their worst case scenario to a more worst case scenario in case the largest pump possible goes out and your booster pump station is still working great 99.9% of the time. It's not going to have any issues. This is just DOH updating it, and we were already planning improvements, which is the good news. So it's just moving that improvements up a little bit and making sure it meets the new requirements. So since the last plan, the city has added or replaced over 25,000 linear feet of water main. It has conducted monitoring at its Taylor Landing well to get a better feel of the arsenic levels at that well, and has also put in place some protections around that well so that general population can't just go and mess with the well or take water from it without knowing how to use it. And then it has also replaced a number of meters, but notably the master meter for the mobile home parks, and replaced it with individual meters. That helps to make sure that we know where the water is going and reduces that distribution system leakage even further. It has also conducted seismic evaluations on the Crestview and Big Rock reservoirs, your two reservoirs, and then there's going to be improvements based on those seismic evaluations in the planned improvements. So this is a long list, or a fairly long list, of your capital improvements that we have planned. And as Marshall and Sean both alluded to, we're going to be discussing this in a lot further detail in our next meeting. So this is just giving you an overview of what projects we've planned, and then we'll go into the financial side of that and the actual schedules in a later meeting. But the city is looking at improving its telemetry and controls to just help make it more efficient to run the system, as well as making improvements to that pump station, as I discussed earlier, recoding the reservoirs. That's just a typical maintenance, making sure that the reservoirs keep running smoothly and extend their life to as long as possible. And then there's going to be some seismic improvements to the Crestview reservoir to bring it up to codes. And then there's a few replacing old water main improvements. As Marshall said, there is about 3% of your system that is still AC main. That's a very small percentage, but those mains are expected to be replaced in the next 10 years. There's some updates to the 2 tote supply stations, removing those 555 to 485 pressure reducing stations just to improve water quality going through that 485 zone. And then the last item on this list we have, so that is treatment for the Taylor Landing well, and that is there for funding reasons. It's planned for 2040, so the furthest possible outline time we can, but we have it on here so that if funding comes up, you can apply for grants for this project. It's on your water system plan, it's planned, opens the door for different grants and other funding options. And also, if the project were to go through, it really speeds up what is required through DOH, making the preliminary planning and reports needed a lot less.
Great. And then we also not only looked at the kind of physical system, but also the staffing and the operations and maintenance levels. For this analysis, we look at the regulatory and age of the system, basically. So different systems have different amounts of requirements from if you have wells or a surface water treatment plant, for example, that'll often take more operation and maintenance requirements than a system like the city of Duval, who is fortunate enough to purchase their water. But there is still maintenance activities and operational activities that have to be done, including exercising valves, taking care of fire hydrants, those types of efforts that do happen regularly. And so the more of those that you have, the more time it takes and the more people are required. So we did look at not necessarily city specific information, but we looked at the broader industry average time requirements and then applied those to the city, the size of the system that the city is. So for example, we look at some industry averages of how frequently and how often and how long it takes to read a meter or to exercise a valve or to maintain a fire hydrant, for example, and then apply that to the city's number of those items in the city. And so then we look at that from the field aspect, but in the city's case, we also looked at the managerial requirements from billing and actually administering and coming up with policies and regulations, those kinds of things. So we wanted to look at that aspect in addition for the city, so that we had a more holistic picture of the staffing requirements to run the city's water system. So currently there are 7 public works employees that assist with the water system part-time. That equates to a little over 5 full-time equivalents. The current staffing level is adequate for operations. However, it may not be the optimum utility operation and preventative maintenance. So certainly things are being operated and there's not any significant issues. Usually, and this is not unique to the city, there can be a trade-off for some of those preventative maintenance items that get deferred because of the available staff time. And then as the city system grows and continues to expand in the next 20-year horizon, we're looking at needing about 9 full-time equivalents to run the system at that optimal staffing level. So again, you're getting more pipes, more hydrants, more customers. It all just takes more time. And the city is working on some aspects and some elements, and we've included some projects here to help kind of make it more efficient. So looking at the SCADA system, for example, will help the water system staff do more with less time, and similar with some of the media reading programs and improvements that are happening that will help to offset some of that effort. But this plays into the Department of Health's requirement to look at the operational and managerial capacity, if you will, of this system. And so our next steps really are to finish the financial analysis this month. Sean alluded to that. We'll be presenting to this committee on that in the near future. And then we're also required to distribute what we term agency review plans for King County and other adjacent water systems to review and agree that there's consistency with what the city is planning in their county plans and things like that. The King County Utility Technical Review Committee also reviews the plan and has to approve that. And they have a roughly 3-month time frame that's required for that. And that is a requirement through the Department of Health and statewide that King County reviews and approves those plans that are in the county. And then once that happens, the city can adopt the plan once we know any sort of comments and have addressed those from the county. And then the city adopts those plans, and then we submit it to the Department of Health, who requires the municipality to have adopted the plan before they approve it. So it's a little bit of a kind of a chicken and an egg type of thing with the Department of Health, but they don't like to approve a plan until the governing body has approved it. And so once we submit it to Department of Health, they have some time to review and make any sort of comments. Usually they're very minimal, and then they issue final approval after they have that. So we believe probably summer of this year is when Department of Health will have their final approval. So I know that was probably a lot of information and more than maybe you'd ever want to know about a water system plan, but we appreciate your time, and definitely we're here for questions if you have them.
Council will open it up. I see that Councilmember Schaefer has a question.
Yeah, a couple of questions. And by the way, this was an excellent presentation, so thank you. Let's see. One of the questions I had, and this is slightly off the topic of the water distribution system, but I'm wondering, do we try to do water and sewer in conjunction as we expand? I mean, obviously for a new housing area, we would, but do those always go hand in hand, or can we potentially supply water to a area or a zone that does not yet have sewer?
Yeah, Steve, I see you
Sure.
unmuted.
Yeah, so hey, Rick, nice to meet you. Someday we may be able to see face to face and in person. But yes, so the city code dictates we cannot serve sewer utility outside the city limits. But per state laws and other requirements, we are, I won't say required to, but certainly it is allowed to have a larger water service area than our city limit boundary. So that's kind of the long and short of it. Typically, the utilities, if they are not in any area, they do go in together through development. We do try to do our own projects in an efficient manner. So if we're doing a water main, we try to fix up something for sewer or even roads if the opportunity strikes, or storm drain. So we do try to commingle our own projects to the best of our abilities, and of course funding, because there's not always funding for everything. So that kind of does limit us. But if you're in the city limits, you are required to be on sewer and served by city water. The development is just so tight nowadays with wells and wellhead protection areas. They're just significantly difficult to achieve in a urban style setting, the city zoning that we have. Hope that makes sense.
Sure,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and along with Steve's point, I hope is as he mentioned, the sewer is set up a little bit differently with it's legally within city limits, but the city does have a larger water system service area than our city limits. So that would be that bigger map that showed the really wide view. So what we had done in the last comp plan is we defined that down to, because then the water system has a duty to serve. One more, Marshall.
Nope, sorry.
The water system has a duty to serve if a customer in your service area. So that big pink, the very large one that's, you know, almost double the size of our city limits, that is our assigned service area. We redefined it down to that blue line, which was generally within one parcel or adjacent to existing main. That way we didn't get somebody at the bottom, the far south end, telling us we had a legal duty to serve and requesting water service from our system. So we tried to kind of define that down a little bit, but yeah, reasonably the business could grow in a sense into all of that area. It's just, for the most part, those would all be developer improvements, not speculative growth for the utility, I guess.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for that. See, one other question. On the slide that we had that was improvements and future expansion items, are any of those urgent? It didn't seem like they were, but I just wanted to make sure with you guys that I didn't miss something. Yeah, this is the slide, right?
That's the one. So the good thing about a lot of these is, I mean, we're already working on the system-wide telemetry controls. So that's something we have a master plan for, and that we're trying to get through RFP to get that built. That's a pretty high priority. And then the other one was the recoding of really the 2.2, so the Big Rock Reservoir, and we're coupling that with some inlet outlet improvements to improve the functionality, and then also the pump station. So that'd probably be the highest priority. Now, the other main replacement we have currently going on underway is Tolt 2 supply line. So that'll hopefully be constructed this summer. So really a lot of our highest priority projects are in movement right now.
That's great. That's great to know. Okay, good. It wasn't clear to me if these were going to be put off another, whatever, 5 years or what, but good.
Yeah, and I like that. I think Marshall was the one who reviewed this slide with the Taylor's Landing well. You know, again, that's kind of a project of opportunity. It's one of those, it'd be a nice to have, and we saw a benefit to adding it to our plan and making it real. That way, should the right funding source or grant opportunity arise, we could take advantage of it.
Okay, good. Yeah, and final request. And Jody, I don't know, Jody, do you have a copy of this already, of the presentation?
It's in your OneDrive. I posted.
Oh, it is. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I had access to it. So great. Thank you.
Questions from other council members? Councilmember Naplin.
Thanks. I have a few questions, and some of mine, maybe you will go over them at a future meeting, but it seemed relevant to what you were talking about today. The first one on our capacity. So I'm assuming when you say we meet all of these requirements, that's taking into account the growth that is coming. And so I know a lot of other cities, especially I think North Bend, even Snoqualmie, are struggling with their right to acquire water. And so we're just buying it from SPU. do we have a contract with them that limits the amount per year, or do we have to renegotiate? Because I'm guessing they have a whole lot of customers, and that customer base is growing for them as well. So do we have a guarantee that we will be able to get the appropriate amount of water from SPU?
So
Sorry.
who's first, Marshall? I can go first. Yes, we have a 50-year contract with SPU that we signed in the early 2000s. So that was 50 years. It's not like we have carte blanche, go nuts, grow as far as you want, become Bellevue. No, they understand our growth regionally. We report to them. They understand where we're headed. So it's not that we can take whatever we need, but we are served by the city, Seattle Public Utility, to the capacity that we will grow to, and they understand those volumes.
So the contract has no limits on capacity written into the contract?
I will double check the no limits clause. I don't think it's like I said, go nuts, but it's within the city's, expected population growth and its annexation areas. And again, our growth boundary as a city is much different than our service area as a water service entity. So they do understand that we are even bigger than the city will be.
Okay, yeah.
And Marshall might have that. I think there's a draw for each connection, and I think that those draws were far larger than we ever take. But please, Marshall, if you have some information.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Sean. Those are per connection. There's a maximum flow and kind of minimum pressure that's allowed there. But Steve, I think like you said there, the projected growth and population growth of the city's water system is well within and well below what those amounts allow. And so those 50-year, or that contract was negotiated at a time where actually people were using more water and the growth was anticipated to be more aggressive. And so I'd have to look back at what those limits are, but it is generally a much higher capacity than any of the other elements in your water system. So we may have glossed over it, or I apologize if we maybe even omitted it, but we look at the system capacity from a standpoint of how many homes, if you will, can be served with your water storage tank, and that is largely fire flow, or if there's an earthquake, how much water is maintained there and can be served. We look at the supply stations like we're talking about here with Seattle Public Utilities, and then we also look at the sizing of the pipes, basically, and then also the pump stations. And so, Stephanie, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm fairly sure that the limiting capacity for the city is the storage volume available, and even that is in excess of that 20-year projection for what we're expecting, not only in the city but beyond for the water service area. But we can find those values for the Seattle Public Utility, those numbers. But with the size of the city and the typical demand that's put on the large Seattle Public Utilities system, it's fairly negligible for a system like the city of Seattle.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just know it's been, North Bend is really struggling, and some of these other cities are really struggling. And I think they purchase water too, but needed elsewhere, and so it can be a problem. So the other question I have is, well, some of this stuff, it looks like it was covered in committee in more detail. So for example, there was a capacity analysis that went into more detail. Is that something you're going to cover later, or should I just refer to what the committee got?
Yeah, you can look at, so I'm actually looking at that too. So I'm looking at the source capacity for TOLT was 12,914 ERUs. So equivalent residential units, so houses. that's our source capacity. Our limiting factor, just as Marshall mentioned, is the storage capacity currently. So we can grow to a maximum of almost 7,800 ERUs.
So the question is that number, the SPU supply, the capacity of the amount of water that can physically fit through the pipe, or is it the contract with?
That's what we're allowed to draw from
SPU.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, so they have different. So in that table, if you do look at that committee presentation, so in the system capacity analysis, they show the source capacity. So they show how they interrelate. So our system capacity, our pipes can move X amount equivalents, but really our limitation is in storage, which you could change if you built bigger storage, but that's, not very financially rewarding.
So the other item was the staffing levels needed, and I think that will feed into our future cost estimates and that financial analysis of rate setting. And when I was looking at the staffing hours, it looked like the vast majority of hours were being applied to meter reading. I don't know if it's supposed to reflect right now, but it's about 2.5 full-time employees every day reading meters. And I feel like I've heard that it is like a couple of days a month, one person goes out and drives around and captures the meter reading. So I'm sure there's other things. So I'm just trying to understand like that number of 2.5 employees every day that they're at work full-time reading meters versus what I've heard is drive around in a car 2 days a month for one person. So, and I don't know, and I know we're also thinking of even investing in remote reading of meters, which wouldn't even require someone to drive around. It would just automatically pick up via, I think, Wi-Fi type technology. I'm not really sure, but anyway, so I'm trying to understand if those staffing needs could potentially go down instead of increase based on the fact that we might invest in this technology. And also, we don't have wells to maintain and all these other things that I know a lot of the other cities have to do. Anyway.
I'll let Marshall go and then I'll follow up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, you're exactly right that using the kind of industry averages for those water meter reads is definitely a bit conservative for the city of Duval, and we can adjust it, and we plan to adjust that staffing analysis before we present the kind of final draft for adoption of the plan. And it would reduce the amount of hours or FTEs for that particular task. And then, as you said, it sounds like maybe you're describing what we call a fixed based meter reading system, where it's kind of through cell signals that it saves that time even more. Some of that meter reading time is also calling up, if you get calls from a customer that maybe there's a misread or something like that and having to go out and check, or I think it's wrong, can you come out and check? So there's a little bit of effort there that even if it was perfectly synced up and didn't have to leave the office, you'd still have to leave the office sometimes. But to your point, I agree that would reduce the FTE staffing account that would be required for that. And in the city's case, you mentioned the wells, and you're exactly right that does take time and additional monitoring and things for systems that require that. For Duval, we haven't planned for that particular effort. We went through and assigned a dozen to maybe 20 different line items, and then assigned staff time to each of those. And so wells, I guess, well, technically you have one per year that you need to monitor, but it's not very much, like you noted. So in the future, I think that you'll mitigate that additional staffing requirement, but I don't know that because the amount of customer growth that we anticipate over the 20-year period, I still think you will have a net growth from where you're operating today, but I do think it would be mitigated by having those telemetry improvements that the city is planning on, as well as some of those meter infrastructure. And we will adjust that analysis and table for the plan that the city adopts and that the regulatory agencies actually see.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then the capital improvement plan and the timeline and cost that was presented to the committee, is that something that is really in flux, or is that something that's been mostly fleshed out?
Yeah, they got a pretty high overview of it. We didn't, I snipped some of the slides out, but it's, you know, probably 3 slides of 30, something like that. So it was a glance at what we're up to, and you guys will definitely hear the rest of it later on. But yeah, for sure, the way we've moved the projects around are in order that makes sense to us for a system, and what makes sense financially also. Spoiler alert, part of it is almost all cash funded. I mean, we don't go into major debt. It's a cash funded CIP program. So it's just balancing the right projects at the right time to maintain kind of an equilibrium.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Councilmember Langle.
Yeah, a couple things, maybe mostly for Steve, but one for our consultants. You know, I'm on the land use committee as well as the finance and administration committee. So the first comment really comes from the land use side of things. What we've been studying and continue to study is the relevance of the old comprehensive plan calculations for growth relative, you know, compared to what we know now. And, you know, this is research in process, but it may very well be that the old schedule or thought process behind urban growth area expansion for the city of Duval is not the direction of the future. So I guess what I would like to know, and you know, when you do your financial or otherwise projections, is really taking a look at that from both directions, because you know, we are seeing quite a bit of difference between the old calculations and what we're looking at right now as we work with the county. So that would be something that I think needs to be coordinated with the land use committee and the work that's being done now to respond to King County. So thought I'd provide that request. Just a comment on the city of Seattle's water and sale of water. I recall a number of years back that when the city was experiencing a lot of demand for themselves, what they did is they increased the cost that they sold water for. So I guess this would be a question for Steve when he takes a look at that 50-year contract to get back to us with what kind of price controls exist in that contract, because the city of Seattle has definitely overshot what they thought they were going to do for their own growth. And they are continuing down that road, as are other jurisdictions that buy water from them. So it might not be a question of whether there is supply there. It might more be a question of what they charge us for it. So maybe Steve could take a look at that and get back to us on that. And then I guess this is a question for my colleagues on council, since, you know, whether this is something we can be done under cash flow, CIP, or whatever, I would look to hear back from colleagues about how we are going to integrate this financial analysis with all the other financial analysis that we are now being required to consider, and how fast we can get on with the big picture financial planning for the city, because all of this really does accumulate and impact our residents. So maybe our colleagues could think about that and, you know, get back to the Finance and Administration Committee. And I say raise this because if we are expected to send something fairly soon in for evaluation, and it has financial calculations and assumptions, and then after that, we are asked to adopt a plan as soon as June of 2021, we will not have our big picture financial analysis done of the city within that time frame. So I guess I'd like to know how we want to proceed with that, because we would be making very big financial decisions very incrementally.
Sounds like you gave us some homework, Dot.
I do. I always give homework, but the main ones, there's really two questions, one for Steve, one for the consultants, looking at the range of growth, because, we are seeing some different things out of land use, and it really is important for them to look at these differences. So we really understand, what we're pricing out, so to speak. And then, and I guess then the other is really a question for the council to answer, how we want to approach these very large cost implications that are going to impact us over the next 10 years.
So
Well,
it's
thank you.
certainly
Those are really, I was just going to say, I don't know, we have time tonight to answer all of that. But
No, I don't
but think
expect you
it-
to. I'm just putting my questions on the table.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, because we will be having another presentation and have an opportunity to look at the full plan here and go more in depth on that. Other questions from council? So not seeing any. Marshall, I just had, maybe this is a good way to wrap up, at least for this evening. I know we'll have a chance to talk more in the future. This is a high level question from council perspective, but one I think every citizen likes to know, and that's about the safety and reliability of our drinking water. I think most folks feel it's pretty reliable. We turn on the tap and for the most part, it comes out and has pretty good pressure. But with your background and expertise, I'm just wanted to ask about the safety aspect to make sure that we're meeting all of our legal and regulatory requirements, and that you don't see any immediate safety issues that we need to address.
Yeah, I would echo that. I just I just had a leak at my service line and had to deal without water for a day, and you don't realize how much you just take it for granted. But it is definitely something we can often lose sight of. But yes, the city of Duval is doing very well and really exceeding many of the requirements that we often see water systems struggle with. So you've done a great job in terms of replacing your aging in kind of your aging and leaking water main materials. The city's been working to replace those for many years now and has done a great job. So seeing 80% of your water system being ductile iron is fantastic to see. That is definitely the current kind of gold standard for water pipe materials, which is great. You have adequate storage capacity, which is fantastic. So even in an earthquake or emergency condition with standby storage is what that's termed, you're doing well and exceeding those expectations. You've got a great looped water system with many different avenues. So even if there is a specific pipe that breaks, there's other ways to reroute the water. And then multiple supply stations from Seattle Public Utility that are adequately sized to meet the system's needs. So from I would say water quality and quantity and redundancy standpoint, the city's water system is a very, very good shape.
Great. Well, I sure appreciate that. Marshall and Stephanie, thank you for the great presentation tonight, for all the work. I also like to just recognize our own folks in Public Works, specifically Steve and Sean and all their staff for the hard work they do. We look forward to having you back and getting to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Very nice.
Well, our next item this evening, and Mayor, I'm not sure we're going to get to the final one with the time we have, but I'd like to move on to our preliminary high-level biennial budget overview from Director Mason. Mayor, I just wanted to check with you, can we move the community survey? That's very important to all of us. I had a chance to review it. Can we move that to council agenda as well? Add that so we could have a brief discussion.
Yeah, if council wants to do that, we can do that.
Council, just a quick show of hands if folks would like to move that item onto council. That looks like we have a majority or everybody, so we'll do that. Director Mason, if you're ready, we can see if we can get through this next part.
I think I'm unmuted. Good evening, everyone. Can you see my the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, Dana Mason, Finance Director. So this is just a preliminary report of the end of the 2019 biennium. There's still some adjustments to be made and some allocations and some line items, but it should provide a really good picture of where the city is at the start of the new biennium. So we'll just start with this page, and let me get my little pointer up here, laser pointer. So the city received 105.9% more than was budgeted, which includes the amendments passed by council in December. So the amount over budget is mainly and largely due to the increase in development. And especially we received a lot of revenue in November and December. So this is everyone should have received a report today. So this is just the report from the first page, which is a summary of the different fund types. And you can see the general fund received almost 105% of budgeted revenue. The contingency fund was spot on. It's just a little over due to some interest revenue. The special revenue funds, it's the transportation benefit district fund, the street fund, the sensitive areas mitigation fund and Big Rock are all in here, and that was just right around 100%. Then debt service, of course, is pretty straightforward. Capital project funds, these are just the park CIP, the Main Street CIP, and the street CIP funds. And the jump there over budgeted was a bunch of street impact fees that we received in December, big chunk. And then the utility funds, this also includes the utility funds CIPs. So the growth there, or the amount over budget, is also due primarily to GFC funds that we received towards the end of the biennium. And then the internal service funds and the bond reserve and redemption fund was just spot on. All right, so our second slide here is expenditures, which I thought were pretty good. I mean, they're just a little of them, some of the funds were a little scary because we're very, very, very close to what we budgeted. General fund, just under 97%. Special revenue funds altogether, just under 97%. And debt service, 99, almost 100%, which is what we would have expected. The capital project funds as well, because we adjusted down. So that's kind of where we expected. Utility funds as well. And then of course the bond redemption and the internal service funds very close to what we expected. So for the general fund, the budgeted revenue was about 3.9 million and actual was about 14.6 million. And a lot of that is due to development. The increase over what we budgeted was due to development. So you can see building permits were about $230,000 more than anticipated. Plan check fees, about $92,000 more than anticipated. And school impact fees, which are being reported in the general fund this biennium, but will be reporting in the building and permitting fund next biennium, were about $150,000 more than anticipated. General fund expenditures, we had budgeted about 3.3 million. They were actually a little bit lower, 12.9 million. And then I just put down, this is just the COVID response. Let me go back one screen so I can just show you the COVID revenue here. So we requested, or we budgeted about $400,000 in COVID money, and we actually received during the biennium almost all of it, except for the FEMA money, which is not unusual. Sometimes FEMA just takes a little bit longer. So we'll just be moving that over into the 2021-2022 budget. And then here's our COVID expenditures. So supplies around $93,000, human services, $67,000, utility assistance, almost $7,000. And then the big expense was the small business assistance, about $215,000. And you can see here that the expense for the expense for school impact fees was a little bit lower because the city received the fees 1 month, and then we remit them to the school district the next month. So we'll have to do a budget adjustment for that also in the next biennium. This is the water, the operating funds of the utilities. So you can see that the water revenue was about 104%, or about $16,000, almost $17,000 more than we budgeted. And the next water expenditures were just under about 90% of what was budgeted. Sewer, we were pretty close as well, just about $12,000 under what was budgeted, which isn't bad for such a, for a $5 million budget. And then expenditures were about $167,000 under budget. Storm revenue, 98.8%, or just, this is even closer, $3,600, $700. And then storm expenditures were about 94.6 of what was expected. And then here's the GFCs, where you can just see that those last 2 months, we got a ton of capital. So the GFCs are the charges to new residents for future capital costs. And you can see water GFCs were about $435,000 more than expected. Sewer GFCs, about $630,000 more than expected. And then storm drainage GFCs, about $84,000 more than expected. And then here's our REIT. So this right here is the REIT each year, this line right here. So you can see that we kind of grew. We had a little dip in 19 and then grew back up in 2020. And this is the number of units that are spent or that were sold. So we sold, or there were 470 units sold during the biennium, 247 in 2019, 225 in 2020. The average sale per unit was about $590,000. That brought in almost $3,000 or $2,900 in REIT, both REITs combined for the city. Our revenue, was almost $1.4 million. And then we had the highest month ever of REIT in the history of the city, or at least the numbers that I have, which are for the last 12 years. And that was almost $160,000 in November 2020 from the sale of a big development. And then here's impact fees. So this first line in each column is park impact fees. And because of developer credits, there were a few park impact fees in 2020. The second or the middle column is street impact fees. And you can see we just had a boost over 2019 and 2020. And then this last one is school impact fees, which just kind of skyrocketed in 2020 and a little higher in 2019 than 2018, in part due because the impact fee itself went up, almost doubled over the same time. I'm just going to close my door here really quickly. And then we get back to the ending fund balance, which is the most fun one. So you can see the ending fund balance we budgeted, this was actually increased on December 15th, but we budgeted to 21.8 million, almost 21.9, and we're going to end up with about 25.1. So that's about $3.2 million more than we anticipated. And a chunk of the general fund and ending fund balance will actually be used to start it's just the building revenues received in 2019 and 2020, minus the building expenditures in 2019, 2020. We're using that money to as a beginning fund balance for the building and permit fund. And that is all I have. Does anyone have questions?
Dina, you mentioned this was a high overview. Will you be bringing this back at another point, or is this our only chance to really talk about it?
No, once we've tightened everything up. So there's just a few things that we need to do, but it's not going to make a huge change. But once I tighten everything up, I'll come back with a final report for you. And But if there's anything that was not in this report that you would like me to dive down into a little bit deeper for the next one, feel free to just email and let me know, and I would be happy to put that information.
Good. We're down to about 8 minutes before council is why I was asking.
Oh.
If you have a quick question, I'm happy to pass that on here to Dana. Councilmember Lingle.
Dana, this is really for our new council member. We're on a cash basis. We're not on an accrual basis. And that's something every time we look at numbers, we have to remember. We're all cash, no accrual. So that's one thing. Second thing, Dana, this is something you do for finance and administration, and I think it would be really good in your final report, is if you segregate out our one-time revenue. For example, we know we had a very high revenue REIT sale this year, which is good. The downside is it's no longer home ownership, it's going to be rental. So in future years, we're not going to see those units turn over. So, but that one-time revenue, it's always something we discuss in finance and administration, and I think it would be great to have it be part of your final report. I know you already track it, so.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that for sure.
Councilmember
I'll also come up with the revenues and expenditures that we think we're going to have to, that didn't occur in 2020 that we're expecting for the next biennium. So I'll have a list of those as well.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, first of all, this was an excellent presentation. It was very good for me to learn where some of the money goes. So thank you. And my question was really along the lines of Councilmember Lingle. I'd like to see in this report what's one-time revenue, what do we expect for ongoing revenue, and where that ongoing revenue is coming from. The question I think in the back of many of our minds is, well, what's the sustainability of this if the number of new units decreases, for example? So that's the type of thing we'd like to get a view on.
You got it. And hopefully you and I can have some time to meet and I can just kind of go over, I don't know how familiar you are with fund structures and stuff like that, but we tend to put we actually just moved one-time revenues from development out of the general fund and into this new building and permit fund. So we can kind of keep them separate from operating revenue that occurs more.
Great, thank you.
Director Liniszewski, did I see your hand up also a moment ago?
Yes, sir. Quick statement of clarification too. So when you see the 472 units on the REIT value, those are not new. That is just a transfer of physical property in the city limits. Yep. Some of those, of course, are new units, but the bulk of those routinely are resales. So just some info.
That's a really good point.
Councilmember Naplin.
Super fast, because it's always been my point that I want to make, is that a lot of our sales tax money is also one-time money related to construction. And so just trying to figure out a baseline and identify that as one-time money is really important to me. And often other cities even pull that out and have it be used for capital or one-time expenses, because it's honestly, a lot of it for the new construction is not ongoing money.
Right. And one thing we have done is we have pulled that out for the next biennium. So it will go into a separate line item and we'll be able to see it. And I wanted to have time to share with you our January sales tax was pretty awesome, but I don't know if there's time or not. I could just show you a really quick.
I think you should, Dana. Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, go for
it. All right. Because it was just like, I was just so thrilled to see this. But this is, can everyone see that okay? Whoa, that's really big. How's that? But it's $25,000 more than January of 2020, and primarily because of the retail trade. So this city was just online buying like crazy. I think we're going to see a really, really good February as well, and then we'll probably just taper out. So Rick, just so you know, when we receive our sales tax revenue, it's from 2 months prior. But anyway, I just thought this was awesome. So, and sales tax from construction is coming back, which is nice.
Well, Dana, thank you. We love awesome information, and that truly is. Well, Council, we're just down to about 3 minutes, so let's take a break here. We'll adjourn our meeting, and we'll see you at Council in just a couple of minutes.